Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the pre-show. This is Scotty Roberts, of course. Good to have you all here. Sean Stroik, good to see you, brother. We start officially at 3 minutes after the top of the hour. So we have about a minute and a half, a little bit more, and we start on the radio station over at Subspace Odyssey Radio, odysseyradio.com. Did it every time. Moses did it every time. Yes. He followed the standard practice of his day, but it wasn't necessarily the standard practice of his day, we'll find. That was standard practice in some times, in some periods, but a little later in biblical writ, you find many pharaohs' names mentioned in accounts. So why is the reason for that? It's be a little interesting study here we'll go through. And I agree with almost everything you're saying there, Sean. Good to have you here, by the way. We've got less than a minute. We go live over on Odyssey Radio, ODYSY radio.com, in audio format only. Because it's a radio station. All right. So my glasses are in severe need of a wipe off, but I don't have stuff here for it. I ran out of the little eyeglass pads. We got 15 seconds, so here we go. We're going to roll. We're going to go dark. Sit tight. We'll be right back.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Wednesday evening, everybody. I think it's Wednesday. Yeah, it's Wednesday. Well, it's Valentine's Day, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day and happy Wednesday to everybody who's out there. Thanks for coming into the show. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your presence and your time. This is Scotty Roberts. This is my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY radio.com, where you can go hear this show in its audio format, or come on over to the YouTube channel, or many other places, the Facebook channel, the X, formerly known as Twitter channel. I don't think we are up on Instagram quite yet. That's coming, but there's a few other places you can find it. So welcome to the program, and glad that you can make it here. Professor Bauer says the term name pharaoh wasn't used by the Egyptians for the king. It was a lower level ruler name. Right, we get the word pharaoh is more of an updating or an extrapolation of terms. It's kind of like in the Bible. People say it talks about baptism in the Bible. Well, it uses the word baptizo in the Greek, but the word is actually not baptism at all. The word is immersion, dunking below the water and pulling up out of the water. Baptizo was the Greek word for immersion, and they used a transliteration of the word rather than talk about immersion, because the literalist Orthodox Church was using sprinkling of babies, touching water to the head, and they didn't want to have a political conflict. So I think there's all kinds of things like that. Pharaoh was not the word that was in common use at the time, but it might have been in common use by the time that these texts were translated into English. So what they talked about was the king, rather than the pharaoh. And we'll look into that a little bit and see if pharaoh even exists in the earliest transcripts that we have of these texts. It's kind of funny, you know, the New Testament texts as they appear, those are texts that date back to, you've got the Codex A and the Codex B and all of these things. You've got texts that date within 100 years of the time of their writing, which is it's good to be king, Jason Patrick. It's good to be king. And so we've got texts from the New Testament that would date all the way back to within 100 years of the time of Christ, or within the 100 years of the time of their writing in the first century, which is different than some of the Old Testament texts. A lot of the Old Testament texts we have, they date back, say, the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah. These are books that date back to the Septuaginta, or the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament text, or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. And these were done by, well, according to history and stories told in history, there were 72 rabbis that went to Ptolemy II and asked for permission to go into the Library of Alexandria and recreate the Hebrew texts as they existed prior to the Babylonian captivity. And so, because all that stuff was wiped out. Now, this was why the Jews were very strong on oral tradition and memorizing. So they went in with all these 72 rabbis went in, and through the oral tradition, as well as documents that existed at the Library of Alexandria in the 400s BCE. They went there and they reconstructed the texts of the Old Testament. Now, the big question is, was the Pharaoh named in those old texts? Was he ever named? Did the rabbis who had recited the Torah for hundreds of years after their destruction or their loss, did they have all of this in their head already, word for word, verbatim? It's gone down from generation. People go, well, you know, the old game of telephone. Well, the problem is telephone is a kid's game done in school to prove a point about transference of data, whereas rabbinic memorization of the Torah or Old Testament books was a religious practice, deeply meaningful, deeply religious, deeply culturally significant memorization. It would be like, just use something as simple as the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America's flag. Have those words changed? I know they added 2 words in the 50s, under God. Those 2 words were added. But have we forgotten that? No, because we've recited it for decades for that one. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We all recited that, at least when we were kids, if you're old enough. If you're my age, I don't think my kids quote the Pledge of Allegiance at school. You know, it's something I need to look into and find out. Anyway, moving on from that. So I think you had oral tradition that was kept over the years, but then the 72 rabbis went and reconstructed the Old Testament. And what did they write it in? What language? They wrote it in Greek. This was after the Hellenization of the Middle Eastern world, of the entire world at that point, the making Greek of everything. Ptolemy being the pharaoh, the Greek pharaoh of Egypt. And let's see, what do you got here? And in the 50 years, because of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. Yeah, there you go. So, so says Jason about the Pledge of Allegiance. So you've got these 72 rabbis reconstructed the text. They wrote it in Greek, and the Greek was known as, the Greek version of the Old Testament was known as the Septuagint or the Septuaginta. And that Septuagint is exactly, if I were to pull a Bible, I have a King James Bible sitting over there, or an NIV, a New International Version, or a modernized version of the Bible. Let's pull the current Bible off of my shelf over there. Look it up, the Old Testament, from Genesis to the last book of the Old Testament. That's the Septuagint. That's been repeated, and the English has been updated, but they haven't updated necessarily any of the information. We go, oh, there's all these scribal additions and edits and all that over the years. I think since the Septuagint, you haven't had much. And where there are some, they're noted, and scholars have noted them. This didn't appear in the earlier text, but it appeared in this text. Or this passage is missing from the earlier text. When I was in seminary, I took textual criticisms courses, and those classes identified most of the problematic areas of the Bible, New Testament and Old Testament. And the interesting thing is there wasn't a whole lot that was a whole lot different from the earliest texts we have. So when you want to go back and talk about the story of Moses, the story of the Exodus, Genesis, and the first 5 books of the Bible, you're going back basically to the Septuagint, which was the Greek rewriting of the oral traditions and the manuscripts that would have been kept at the Library of Alexandria prior to 400 BCE. So you're going back pretty far to get to those texts. So all of that to say this, title for tonight's show, Amenhotep II. There, I've named the pharaoh. I believe it's easy to figure out who he was. And there's lots of clues in the Old Testament documents, in the Septuagint, that will tell you when the Exodus took place. I think, however, by the time 1,000 years into the land, after the conquest of Canaan, after what you got, the Exodus, 40 years wandering in the wilderness, Moses dies atop Mount Nebo, Caleb takes over, or Joshua takes over. They start the conquest of what became the land of Israel, the promised land, because there were inhabitants there, the Canaanites. And so they tore down cities and beat cities and so on. And that's actually one point that I want to bring up. And I don't know if I'm going to get to this in the notes a little bit later tonight, but one point for me that really started to establish the dating system of the Old Testament, you've got, and I've mentioned this before in talking about this topic, if you go to your Old Testament, go to the book of 1 Kings, chapter 6, verse 1. And I'm going to paraphrase it. It basically says that the founding of Solomon's temple, Solomon, the son of David, who was the first unifier of all the clans in Israel, and he became almost like in Ireland with Brian Boru, who became the first high king. David became the first high king, if you will. Well, he was the second. Saul was the first high king. David unified them even more, established Jerusalem as the capital, brought the Ark of the Covenant in, and wanted to build the temple, but that was left to his son Solomon. So it says in 1 Kings 6:1, in the year that Solomon dedicated the founding of the temple, Temple 1, as it's known archaeologically, in Jerusalem, it was 480 years after the Exodus. Now, could it have been 477 years? Could it have been 482 years? Was it an even number of years? We don't know for sure. What the text tells us is that it was a 480-year block of time had passed. It also tells us that after Joseph came to Egypt, sold into slavery, a story taking place a few hundred years earlier, and brings his father's family, his father being Jacob or Israel, and his clan of about 70 people from Canaan into Egypt to settle there. Joseph's the Grand Vizier, a huge, interesting story about him. You talk about the Hyksos period in Egypt, and that's where I think Joseph fits in, and there's lots of reasons for that. We've talked about that before. Maybe we'll do it again some other time. But we're told that, the Hebrews were slaves for 400 years in Egypt. Well, it doesn't quite work out to be 400 actual calendar years. There's portions of 4 centuries, though. It's kind of like the whole story of Jesus, his death, his burial, his resurrection on the 3rd day. People always say, well, it was 3 days. Well, it's actually, he was crucified and died on Friday and rose again on Sunday morning, according to the story. By my account, that's not even 48 hours. So how could it be 3 days? Well, in the Jewish way of viewing things culturally, Friday was one day, Saturday a second day, Sunday the third day. Even though he died in the afternoon on Friday, was buried on Saturday or late Friday, buried all through the day Saturday, rose on Sunday morning. That's one full day and two little portions of days. So it's not 3 days, but we're told it was 3 days. So what does Jason say in the chat room? Not to be confused with Alexandretta. If you were, you've been they're digging in the wrong place. If you all know what that reference is. There's actually a picture of John Ward and I. We're standing in the temple of Hatshepsut, and John's wife Maria took a picture of us. We're looking at hieroglyphs, and where John and I looked at each other and was smiling, and we both said, and it wasn't, the context wasn't perfect, but he goes, they were digging in the wrong place. And so I've got a picture where we're doing the same exact thing. So anyway, thank you, Jason, for that archaeological input. So the big question comes in. Can we date the Exodus? Can we say something that many scholars will say the Exodus mythology never took place? Yet there's no direct archaeological data. You'd think there would be for such a major event as the Exodus, a major exodus or migration of people out of Egypt. But of course, that move out of Egypt, hey, Roy Palvidel, how you doing? That move out of Egypt, he's over in the chat room, was a migration out of Egypt, yes. But would it have been something that would have been recorded in Egyptian history? And where did it take place? Where did the Exodus happen? Did it happen from down 500 miles south of what is today current day Cairo, down the Nile in Luxor, what is today Luxor, which was ancient Memphis, or I'm sorry, ancient Thebes? Is that where the Exodus took place? You go down there now, you've got the Temple of the temples of Luxor, Luxor Temple. You've got the Karnak complex of temples, all on the east bank. The west bank, you've got the Valley of the Kings, which is just a few miles in. You can see it from the river. We would get off the boat coming over from the east side, the east bank, Luxor, and the temples, and we'd take the ferry boat across, and there's hundreds of ferries that go back and forth, little boats, 20 feet long, and they take you across the river for a few bucks, and we'd get off on west bank of Luxor, walk down the main street, and it was all very third world looking there, and we'd veer off on one of the side roads and walk back to John and Maria's house, back over by a banana plantation back there. And but you could see the Theban Mountains right in front of you. And we'd hop in the car, it'd be another 10 minutes up the road, and we'd be at all the temple complexes, Hatshepsut's temple and all those, and you'd follow the road around, you pass John Carter had a house there. Remember who John Carter was? Discovered King Tut's tomb. He had a house there right over by Valley of the Kings. You just go around that little cut in the Theban Mountains, and you were over in the Valley of the Kings. So 10, 15 minutes from John's house by the back roads, maybe 5-10 minutes. And just a few miles, all out in the open. You felt like you were all in the open out there, just going right over there. So anyway, I believe the Exodus took place up in Memphis, or ancient Mennefer, which is now today Memphis. That is where the Northern Palace was. That is where the great canals were. We talked about last time how Moses' mother hid him in a basket and didn't float him down the main channel of the Nile. The baby never would have survived. But she took him and she hid him in a basket and hid him in the reeds on the bank of the Nile, at the place where the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, bathed in her pool there. So the only place that would have been done is off the main canals that were dug. which were the main roadways, if you will, the waterways to get around Memphis and northern Egypt. It also has, if you've got the slaves living in a land called, in the Old Testament, they call it the land of Goshen. Goshen, in the book of Genesis, where Joseph settled his brothers and his family. Well, Goshen is off to the east, a little bit north and east of what is today present day Cairo, and Memphis being only 25 miles to the south of Cairo. And so it's all just off to the east there. And there were passages in the Old Testament, the Exodus story, where it talks about, and Moses talked to Pharaoh, and he turned on his heel and left the court of Pharaoh. And that same day he reported the news to the leaders of the Hebrew slaves, to the the leaders of the Jews, who were in the city of Avaris, as we know it, or in the land of Goshen. Now, how could he do that in the same day? If it was all the way down in Luxor, that's not where that happened. It would have been the northern palace up in Mennefer. Go down, and all he has to do is ride the canal down a few hours, and he's over in Goshen. So this is where and by the way, the land of Goshen, ancient Avaris, was also known as the mud brick making capital of Egypt at that time. So you've got all these little factoids that start to put together. I say there's not always direct archaeological evidence, but I started to call it indirect or secondhand archaeological historical evidence. And I had my old professor told me, "Oh, Scott, there is no secondhand evidence. Evidence is evidence." But I called it secondhand because it wasn't something that you could find directly. So you start looking at all that. I think Moses' mother set him in the basket there because she was so Egyptianized. She wasn't doing something that later they could say, "Oh, that's just a myth," because they were playing off the story of Osiris being in a basket on the Nile. I say she did that deliberately. She played into the Egyptians by playing up the story of Osiris in the basket. Well, it says that the young daughter of the Pharaoh, that she found this baby and that she asked, because Miriam, the older sister of Moses, said, "I know a woman who can suckle that babe for you." And she sent him back with his sister until he was weaned. And as the text says, until she was old enough to claim him as her own. So she was going to adopt him, but she sent him back to be weaned. Now, the girl that would have found him, according to the dating system, if you go all the way back again to 1 Kings 6, chapter 6, verse 1, and in the 40th year, 480th year after the Exodus, Solomon laid the foundation stone, the cornerstone for the founding of Temple 1. 480 years between the time of Solomon dedicating the temple, and if you go back 480 years, the time of the Exodus. Now, there is a fairly solid date in history of the establishment of Temple 1. Now, there's many scholars that will claim, well, maybe Solomon didn't even exist. Maybe the house of David didn't exist because there's no extant archaeological evidence. Well, the same thing has happened over the years. So much little bits and pieces of evidence of the house of David, David's palace in Jerusalem, all these, the tomb of David, so on, all of these things exist. But there's not directly somebody writing, and David lived on this day and did this and this day. It doesn't state that, but you got all this archaeological evidence that exists around it. So Solomon, they say, whether you agree that he existed or not, they say that Temple 1 was founded right around 966 BCE, mid 10th century BCE, in the mid 900s. And so if you've got that happening, and you take that, and by the way, that date of 966 BC, that's a date that there's a lot of dispute over, but only in a few years' direction in either direction of that date. You'll have 3 to 6 years in either direction. Happen on this date, right in here. There's reasons they might go 5 or 6 years this way or 3 or 4 years that way. So the median date's 966. If you took that 480 years and added it on to the date going backwards in time in BCE, 966, 480, you end up with the year 1446 BC or thereabouts, give or take a few years in either direction. And so you start to look at facts around that. And you start to see if there's a case that's to be built. Does that biblical verse, is it accurate? Is it giving you accurate history? And what you find by going to 1446 BC is the Pharaoh who was sitting on the throne. Now there's four actually, different chronologies of the kings of Egypt, as they're called. And they shift a little bit in this direction or that. All 5 of them, none of them mesh exactly perfectly. And you have to account for, were they accounting this Pharaoh as a co-regent? Were they adding his co-regency on top of his regnal years? So on and so forth and all of that. So you end up with a median date of Amenhotep II being in his 5th year of reign in the year during or right around the year 1445, 1446 BCE. Then you start looking at his military campaigns. You look at his activity as a pharaoh. You look how long he was on the throne. You look at who was his grand vizier, who were the people around him, and you start looking at this dating system. If indeed the Exodus took place in 1446 BC, Moses, according to the scriptural tale, was about 80 years old at the time. So roughly Joe Biden's age, except it said when he died 40 years later, they said his eye was not dim and his natural force and mental capacity was not abated. It said in the old English about Moses. They said he was pretty tough old 80-year-old dude. And he's got all that classical training, of course, from his earlier days. But if he is indeed 80 years old, then he would have been born right around 1526 BCE. Who was on the throne in 1526 BCE? You had a man named Tutmosis I. And he had a daughter. And his daughter was a woman named Matkare, who became later known by her regnal name as Hatshepsut. We've talked about some of these things before. Hatshepsut was the queen who raised this guy, this bust I have here of Senenmut. She raised him to royal power. She made him a prince of Egypt. She gave him 92 royal titles. All we know about him in Egyptian history is that Senenmut was born to commoners. We don't know anything else about him. Born to commoners. But he's raised to great heights by Hatshepsut, who was formerly known, before she became the pharaoh, she was known as Matkare. Matkare was the daughter of Pharaoh Tutmosis I. Now, as daughter of Pharaoh, she bore a title. It wasn't princess. Her title was Pharaoh's daughter. That was the actual title, Pharaoh's daughter. And there's only 2 known females in ancient Egyptian history that bore the title Pharaoh's daughter. Go to the Exodus passage. It mentions Pharaoh. It mentions Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh, by the way, is a direct translation during that time period. So Pharaoh's daughter. And so who was Tutmosis I? When did Matkare, his daughter, how old was she in 1526? If 1526 is indeed the year, at least by the biblical calendar, that Moses would have been born, 1526, Matkare was between 7 and 10 years old. And so we have in the biblical story The young woman, Pharaoh's daughter, a title, I believe, being spelled out in the scripture. Just like Pharaoh was a title, this is Pharaoh's daughter, which was a title in 1526 BCE. Pharaoh's daughter found a baby in the Nile, according to the book of Exodus, and she sends him back to his mother to be weaned and until she is old enough to claim him as her own. We don't know what age that was. But what is also interesting is this guy, and I'm going to go into some deeper material about establishing this, but Senenmut, as I've mentioned on this show before, I've written about it, so I don't want you to be bored with it because it's some of the same old information we've talked about before. But that man Senenmut, who was given 92 royal titles by Pharaoh Hatshepsut, whose parents were commoners. Nobody knew. Did that mean slave? Did that mean common laborer, common worker? She elevates him to power, and she gives him his name, Senenmut. We have no idea what his name was before that. Remember in the biblical passage, it says, I'm going to call him Moses because I drew him out of the Nile. Moses, to draw out of the water. Well, you also had her father was Tutmosis the first. Her brother, who became her husband, Tutmosis the second. His son by a harem wife, Tutmosis the third. Tutmosis the third's son was Amenhotep the second, the man that I believe was Pharaoh of the Exodus. So it says she renames him. She gives him the name Senenmut. What does she name him? She names him Senenmut. What does that mean? In Egyptian, Senenmut means mother's brother. It means literally, I, your mother, am elevating you to status of brother to the gods with me. Now we know Matkari didn't have any children except one. She had the Princess Nefruri, who died around age 15 or 16. And that she had appointed Senenmut to be, at first, the tutor to the royal daughter when she was married to her brother, the Pharaoh, Tutmosis II. And remember, tutors back then weren't school marms. They were usually generals who had a gloriously marked history, military history. They were noblemen. Those were the people that were appointed to be the royal tutors at the time. And so here is Senenmut, appointed to be the royal tutor. And from there, she gives him all his 92 other royal titles. Senenmut, she names him. And Senenmut means mother's brother. I, your mother, am elevating you to status of brother to the gods with me. Senenmut, who I believe was Moses. I believe Hatshepsut, known as Matkari in her earlier days, was the young girl who found him in the Nile, Pharaoh's daughter, because a lot of other archaeological historical facts around them make those factoids make sense. All right? Secondhand facts, you can call them. Secondhand historical data, secondhand archaeological information. So you have what happens to Senenmut, this guy. When he's about the age of 40, by the Egyptian chronology, he disappears off the scene completely. He has two glorious royal tombs that he made for himself. One is, both of them are right in front of Hatshepsut's temple in Luxor, Deir el-Bahre. And her temple is carved out of the mountainside, the cliff face, which if you just go right over that cliff face, the other side is the Valley of the Kings. And Senenmut created these two tombs. And one of the tombs, if you did a cutaway, I've talked about this before, over on the other side in the Valley of the Kings was Hatshepsut's tomb. And it's cut down through the cliffs. You have to climb way up on the ladders into the cliffs. And then it goes down into the mountainside and down into the ground where her tomb is. if you go to the other side, the east side of the Theban mountain range, which is just a ridge, you've got Senenmut's tomb at the temple of Diyar el Bahre, Hatshepsut's temple. You go down into his tomb shaft, and if you were to take that whole scene and do a cutaway underground, you'd have the temple, the Theban range, that ridge of mountains. You'd have her tomb over here and Senenmut's tomb over here. And they both went underground, and they met underground within feet of each other. Now, there's a lot of speculation that Senenmut, this guy, and Hatshepsut had a love affair. And that it was a lot like, and this isn't a biblical story, this is an Egyptian history, that they had a love affair. And that he was like Essex was to Elizabeth I. Never married, they never had children, but there was a love affair. And he was the grand royal architect. He built her temple, he built her tomb, and he built his own tomb, and he built them to meet underground with just a little bit of rock face in between them. I am live, Kelly Bell. I'm always live. This show is always live. I don't think I've done a recorded show for Intrepid Radio for 2 or 3 years. That doesn't mean we won't ever do any again. But yes, we're live. We are always live. Kelly Bell, you can take that one and spread that all around. This show is always live. So, yeah, right now it's 9:37 p.m. my time in central United States. So, and we've got about 20 minutes left of this show for the radio audience. Then we go to the captain's cabin. So, radio audience, keep that in mind. Right after this show ends in almost exactly 20 minutes, which will be 9:58 or 10:58 if you're out east. We have a couple of minute break, and then we go live. We just carry right over into the captain's cabin. So you can join us at the captain's cabin over on the YouTube channel. All right. Some things cannot be scripted. Says, sir, I don't know what that one's for, but there you go. So you've got this whole situation that's going on with Hatshepsut, with Senenmut. There's many things that happen with Hatshepsut and Senenmut after their deaths, 40 years after their deaths. 40 years later, according to the biblical chronology, if the Exodus indeed took place in 1446 BCE, if Moses was indeed born in 1526, and if the Exodus took place in 1446, then in 1406, I'm sorry, Exodus in 1446, Moses was 80. And if he indeed came back and led the people out of Egypt, led not even a slave revolt, so to speak, but just a mass migration out of the enslaved, or the working class of Egypt. And then the Pharaoh chased him down. And I have lots of theories about that I've talked about. Yeah, math is hard, Sean Stroik. Lots of theories I've talked about. You know, it's interesting to me that all this confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh, he's not named in the book of Exodus, but it all takes place and culminates in the Exodus. And he's never named. And I thought, why did he do that? I do know that in Egyptian religious practice, to speak the name gave eternal life to the name. Was there anything on Moses' part that says, just not going to speak the name into eternal life? The Egyptians can do that. I'm not going to do that. Was that his reason for omitting the name? Were the names lost to the 72 rabbis when they wrote the Septuagint 1,000 years later? I don't know exactly. Could it be, I had a theory, could it be that, now remember, the Grand Vizier in Egypt was Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh, was one of the things that his name meant. Senenmut was Grand Vizier to Hatshepsut, meaning if she left Egypt on campaign or whatever, she went to Punt, the big thing that happened in Punt, um, that Senenmut would have been left in charge, and he would have been the pharaoh in her absence. Same thing with Amenhotep II. We know that he had 5 military campaigns out of country in that first 5 years of his reign, which took place that first 5 years, the 5th year of his reign, 1446 BC. The date we plugged in is the Exodus, if we base it on 1 Kings 6:1. He would have been the pharaoh on the throne, gone through 5 military campaigns. It says that when you see him after the Exodus, after the slaves have left, he comes on the scene and he asks, almost like he's been surprised, "Where are my slaves?" he says. What does he do? Mounts up his army. They take off after them. Now, here is a scenario that I have thought about. I don't know anybody else who's presented this information. I'm sure it's not new with me over the centuries, but I thought, what if the pharaoh that Moses was encountering was not Amenhotep II, but was Amenhotep II's Grand Vizier, who was a man named Rechmir, who was about the same age, if not a couple of years older than Moses. He would have been contemporary to him. And that if Moses indeed did grow up in the courts of Pharaoh in that time period, Rechmir would have also gone to the school of the nobility. At the same time, he would have been a contemporary of Moses when Moses was Senenmut. Also, he was an elderly man by the time. He was in his 80s. Is this who Moses encountered? Did he recognize Moses? Did he know him? I know who you are. Moses didn't make any beans about, I was once nobility here. I think everybody knew that. He was the great murmur in the court of Egypt. And people feared him. It said the whole court, Pharaoh's court, feared him. He was a foreign dignitary, a foreign leader to them, even though it was of the slave people. So when he came on the scene, was he dealing with the Grand Vizier, Rechmir? And was Amenhotep II fresh home from campaign? This is why they could mount their chariots and armies almost immediately, because they were still, in a sense, hey, everybody, saddle back up. We're heading right back out to chase down the Hebrews. So, big questions there. Who died? Who was the firstborn that died? Did Pharaoh lose a son? This is interesting. We're going to cover that in this little mini series as we go on with it. But for right now, let's get into some more of this material that I started with the other day, mostly because I think this is really fascinating stuff. And I started talking about these 3 introductory background pieces of matter that we have to deal with on finding out who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And the first one was we started discussing the reason for Moses' omission of the Exodus Pharaoh's throne name. Now, every time Moses wrote the dynastic title of the Exodus Pharaoh, it was devoid of his pharaonic throne name, like Sesostris or Amenhotep, Tutmosis, etc. And writers, especially writers of historical books in the Bible, who routinely transliterated each of Pharaoh's praenomen, his pharaonic name, beginning with the reign of Pharaoh Shishak, appeared in Scripture. For example, Shishak is named in the Old Testament 7 times, Shishak. And though never is he referred to merely as Pharaoh, the same is true of Pharaoh Necho, whose name appears 9 times in the Old Testament. The only exception to this rule, apart from the 21 references in the prophetic books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, where the Egyptian monarch is referred to only as Pharaoh. in the Greek, the Septuagint. And so the question that arises is why Moses consistently omitted the throne names of pharaohs, especially in the historical book of Exodus. Wouldn't that name be important? Or was it possible that the book of Exodus wasn't meant to give historical data, but to use history as a backup for a bigger story? And that was omission of the Pharaoh's throne name wasn't, some say it wasn't theologically motivated, but what if it was? What if it was trying to prove we're talking about God, about Yahweh, the Savior of Israel? One of the theories says that the absence of Pharaoh's praenomen in biblical history, especially the second millennium BC, is often used either to support the assertion of the legendary nature of the Exodus narrative or mythological nature of it, or to demonstrate that the Hebrew writers were not truly interested in history. And these criticisms really dissipate under a closer examination of the practice of Moses' day. Hofmeyr, I mentioned him the other day when we started this series, Egyptologist. He suggests that the absence of Pharaoh's name may ultimately be for theological reasons, because the Bible is not trying to answer the question, who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, to satisfy the curiosity of modern historians down the line. Rather, it was seeking to clarify for Israel who was the God of the Exodus. This was his theory. And to support this idea, he appeals to Exodus 5:1, which he uses to suggest that Pharaoh not only rejects Moses' petition to allow the Hebrews to worship Yahweh in the desert, but he rebuffs Yahweh by denying knowledge of him, setting the stage for all these subsequent series of plagues in which Yahweh manifests his power both to Pharaoh and to Israel. And Moses thus avenges Pharaoh's reproach of God by leaving him unnamed. That's a theory. And Hofmeyr certainly is correct that Yahweh, or Jehovah, intended to demonstrate to the Israelites that he is God, that he is their Lord God, and to show the Egyptians that he's the Lord God. But Hofmeyr isn't justified in suggesting the absence of Pharaoh's name is motivated to desire in some kind of way to exact revenge on Pharaoh, since Exodus 7:5 clearly states that Yahweh's message was directed not toward Pharaoh, but toward the Egyptian people. And so that goes on. So the next point is that Pharaoh's throne name is omitted in accordance with contemporary Egyptian historiography. So if Moses, and this is something Sean Stroik, you were talking about in the chat room a little earlier, if Moses did not omit Pharaoh's personal name for theological reasons, then why did he omit it? The answer is found in the historical development of monarchical terms. The dynasty title Pharaoh derives from the word that literally means great house in Egyptian. So during Egypt's old kingdom, we're talking 1,000 years before the time of the Exodus. The old kingdom, the word was used of the royal palace. Pharaoh was the royal palace. And not until sometime during the middle of the 18th dynasty, which is what we're talking about now, the smack middle of the 18th dynasty is Hatshepsut, Senenmut, I believe the Amenhotep II, Tutmosis the first, second, and third. All these pharaohs lived in the middle of the 18th dynasty. And slightly before the reign of Tutmosis III, who would have been the stepson to Hatshepsut, the father of Amenhotep II, it was used as an epithet for the Egyptian monarch. Pharaoh became known in the middle of the 18th dynasty as the word that no longer applied to the royal palace or the house of Pharaoh. It applied to the Pharaoh himself. The king himself became Pharaoh in the middle of the 18th dynasty. So I see somebody saying something. I saw Yahweh stick out underneath there. Professor Bauer says Moses and Yahweh were mid-level administrators. Stories were manipulated to create a story. Says who? Says who? Moses, I think, was an actual historical figure. Why is there any reason to believe that he doesn't exist as much as we believe Nostradamus existed, or Queen Elizabeth I existed, or so on and so on and so on? It's because there's not direct historical data. So what we're saying is that these ancient texts that list historical data, they're a bunch of hooey. That's because these guys are just Yahweh. We're mid-level administrators. Yahweh was the private name of God back in the Old Testament. Yahweh appears long before Moses does, but Moses wrote of him, so that's where we learn of him. Let's move on from that. There's more to say on all of that stuff. Regarding Pharaoh's throne name, during Egypt's Old Kingdom, the word was the royal palace or the royal family, the royal house became known as Pharaoh. So the father Amenhotep II was used as an epithet for the Egyptian monarch. The standard practice of Thutmose III's time was to leave enemy kings unnamed on official records. So if Moses, as Senenmut, would have attended the school of the nobility, the pharaonic house, he would have learned exactly what was being done in the time of Thutmose III, who would have been roughly just a little bit younger than he was, a few decades younger. But what did they do in that time? They traditionally always left the enemy's names off of official records, the names of the kings. The campaign of Thutmose III against a rebellious coalition at Megiddo, instigated by the Emperor Mitanni. We talked about this last week a little bit. The king of Kadesh. He's referred to as the king of Kadesh, not by his name. He's called the prince, or the prince of Megiddo. The Amata Stele of Amenhotep II, which boasts of the king's successful battles against 7 Syrian tribes of Takshi, identifies the foreign rulers only as 7 chieftains. They omitted the ruling names of these people. It was a practice of the day to omit the name of the ruler. Also, well, this is all under that first point of saying, I had this point of the reason for Moses' omission of the exodus-pharaoh's name. So we've gone through most of the good detail about that. Now we start breaking into biblical chronology, and we don't have any time left on radio. We've got just about 3 minutes left. But let's present this, the biblical chronology, the precise dating of the Exodus. So before proceeding to what I believe and really establishing why I believe the exact date I gave you was it, we can establish that date. And the central text for this is 1 Kings 6:1. You got to go read that. It connects the Exodus to later Israelite history by noting that Solomon began constructing the temple in the 480th year after the Exodus, signifying an elapsed time of 479 plus years. So, which imperial data, Elderberry? The chronology of the kings of Egypt, that imperial data comes from Egypt. Those records exist. So these pharaohs ruled. All right. 1446 was the date of the Exodus. I also believe there is an event that took place, remember at the beginning of the conquest of Canaan? 40 years after the Exodus, Joshua takes over. What's the first city they conquer? Jericho. The walls came tumbling down. Jericho. Well, Jericho, if you go to the ruins, the tell in the center of Jericho today, which still exists, Kathleen Kenyon went there. Many archaeologists went there. That was dated, the destruction of that city was dated to 1405 BCE, which would have been 1446 BC to 1405 BC is roughly 41 years difference. So if they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, the first military act they had was the destruction of Jericho. That took place in 1405 BCE. According to modern archaeology, does that fit the dating system? It does. And we got to leave the point at that, because to try to dig into any more than that for tonight, we're going to start getting into new material. And I don't want to do that quite yet. So what do you got? They entered the land in 1406 BCE. Moses dies. The people have been wandering for 40 years. They start conquering the land. They conquer the city of Jericho. And archaeological data for that is astounding, by the way. And they conquer Jericho in 1405, which would have been roughly 40 years after the Exodus. If the Exodus was 480 years before the founding of the temple, making it 1446 BCE. That, to me, that date alone of Jericho, the destruction of Jericho, should be enough for most people to go, okay, that's starting to make sense. All right, we'll pick that up later. We're going to go over to the captain's cabin. But for now, I want to say to the radio audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. Come over to youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. Find the captain's cabin. It'll be playing there in just a couple of minutes. Everybody else, sit tight. We'll be right back. Radio, live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program.
Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here.
Dave, I love you, brother.
I miss you too.
I miss you too, I heard.
Yep,
Did you guys hear that?
I heard that.
I miss you, Dave.
Well, Aaron, welcome to the Captain's Cabin. We went to full screen. I totally forgot to take that graphic down during the show. I was so into just talking about what I was talking about. If you notice, I've moved things around in here just a little bit. I was sitting with my computer at an angle on the end of my 7-foot-long desk here, and I was always sitting straight. I'm looking this way, and I'm typing, getting a crick in my neck. So I thought, you know what? Maybe if I shift things around on my desk, I won't have that crick in my neck anymore. And so I just switched that around today. That's why the field of view is a little different. So, so Professor Bauer, you think that there were attack helicopters that aided in the Exodus? Because you know the Abydos lintel is not as old as the Exodus. So there you go. All right. Let's see. What did Mr. Robertson? Yeah, that was funny. That was for how about that? That was for Wendy's Valentine's show with Kenny B this morning. So let me edit that out. She is my radio wife. That's why we put that up there. There you go. Robertson is gone for tonight. So there you go. Thank you, Field Guy. So good evening, Claudette. Good to see everyone. I'm glad you're making it for the second half of the show. Good to have you here. I know everybody's schedules are weird, so hopefully you'll go back. You can hear the recording in the archive of the first half of the show. It'll be over on YouTube, and it will also be over on the Patreon site. I like talking about this stuff, and I think that there's some very interesting information here. I think the historical information starts to, and I'm not presenting everything right now, I'm giving you an overview of these things. We can dig into this. This gets pretty thick and pretty deep in establishing the dating system, in establishing the dates and the things that happened during those time periods. The whole issue of the name of the king of Egypt, yeah, it wasn't used commonly. It was known as king. Pharaoh didn't come into play as a word used to describe the king himself until the middle of the 18th dynasty, which was just about the time that Moses was born. So that's when that came into play, and it was used thereafter. So, LOL, Professor Bauer. What did Professor Bauer say? Oh yeah, that joke. He was the first person to download instructions from the cloud on a tablet and not read the T's and C's. And not read the T's and C's. I'm not sure what that means. The T's and C's? He was the first to download instructions from the cloud on a tablet and not read the T's and C's. Not sure what that means. T's and C's? And by the way, terms and conditions. Duh. All right, there you go. My mind was in a totally different place with that. So the terms and conditions, right. And technically, uh, according to the story, was it a cloud that God appeared in on the top of the mountain? I don't know. It says the tablets were written with the finger of God, which could be poetic language just to mean that, you know what, Moses wrote inspired by God. We don't know for sure. So titties and cookies, asked Field Guy. Maybe. There is that. So I think it's interesting too that I have in the book, I'd put in that I thought that Sarabat el-Khadim was the mountain of God mentioned in the Old Testament. And that because you've got the community that was up there of priests, you've got all the tablet making that was done there, stone tablets. You've got piles of debris of discarded stone tablets that they'd be inscribing them, they broke and they'd throw them on the spoil pile. You got all the temples, the shrines that are up there. And it's mentioned in the Old Testament, in the story of the Exodus. Now, Flinders Petrie, archaeologist in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he thought that Sarabat el-Khadim was Mount Sinai. And so we went up there, we kind of thought, maybe this is true, maybe this is so. You got Hebrew inscriptions, some of the Paleo-Hebrew, pre-Hebrew language as we know it today, was inscribed in some of the walls of caves up in those mountains, on the walk up to the temples up there. Because they were mining copper, they were mining turquoise up there. Sucks if you make a typo. Oh! I meant eyeball with a slash, not fish with a slash. There's some comic meme I saw that was, no, you got it all wrong. It's not bird and two wavy things. It's a, what do you say? Wavy thing, like the I after E except after C or whatever. That one of those rules. I played on that. So I think it's very possible that the Mount Sinai of the Bible was actually in what is today Saudi Arabia. Interesting stuff. So I think there's still a lot to be studied, because there is a site over across the Gulf of Aqaba, not just the Red Sea. Remember, it says that the Israelites, they went across the north of the Sinai and they went down. And there is a place that seems to have a lot of the physical characteristics. There is a place in Saudi Arabia that shows there's remnants of settlements that were there for the 12 different tribes. There's calves inscribed all over the walls, the Hathor, all kinds of archaeological evidence that could very well have been the site. And the Saudis don't let you in there. They've got it closed off. Why? The Arabic world doesn't really want to give Israel in current day any kind of claim to the land. And so that's why they don't allow a lot of study and research in there. So anyway, leaving it at that. That's all I got on that. We won't pick that up again till tomorrow. Anybody got anything exciting you want to talk about in relation to what we're talking about on the show? You can call in and we'll talk. So other than that, we'll give it a 10 count, a slow 10 count, and see where everybody is. If you want to call in and get involved in discussing this topic. Otherwise, we will leave it for the next time to re-engage the topic. As for right now, I wasn't here on Monday. No big problem. Just exhausted. Just totally exhausted. Burning it at both ends to get a project for a client done. something had to give. It had to be the radio show. My apologies for that. And you wouldn't have enjoyed the show if I had done it that night anyway, Monday night. Said nothing to give, no mental capacity. So, JP Professor, do your thing and filibuster till 3 a.m., says Field Guy. Now, they can only go till 11. So if they want to come in and talk about this topic, they are welcome to come in and talk about this topic. So there it is, JP smiling. Other than that, I got nothing much left. I should have a plan B. I could certainly back up. I could read something. I got nothing else prepared to talk about. I could go on this topic, but then it would be more of the show. The radio audience would miss that. So I can do other things. I was going to talk about tarot tonight. I do have a tarot reading that I do every day. Card of the day over my TikTok. Some of you have had people go, I'll never listen to TikTok. China. I don't really care. When it comes down to TikTok isn't a problem for me. But if it's a problem for you, you don't have to go over there, certainly. But if you'd like to, go on over to my TikTok and find me and follow me, and we do a card reading of the day every day. So I started that about 2 weeks ago. That's not a very long time, but Barbie D, thank you. Saying I'm entitled to take time off. I appreciate that. I don't want to let down the people who support this show, though. But every now and then something's got to give, and it's got to be sometimes just my time. And I appreciate that for everybody who supports that and supports this show. I thank you for that. You being one of them, Barbie D. Appreciate that. Let's see, because my friend wouldn't leave me alone. I had to make one because my friend wouldn't leave me alone. Oh, I took a few days off and no one noticed, said Field Guy. Oh, your listeners probably did. So, yeah, everything's going just fine over here. Health is good. I've met with all the appropriate doctors. I've got another doctor's appointment. I got to meet with that cardiologist, but that's not till May. It's funny. You've got to get your cardiology appointment in. Okay, well, let's get in. Well, he's not open until May 20th. Okay, I'll take the May. I remember telling the nurse, she goes, his first day available is May 20th. I go, May 20th. I don't think I'm doing anything on May 20th. I said, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but it's a good guess I'm open. I'll let you know if there's a conflict. So, Sean Strike says, fuck TikTok, sorry. Scotty, you don't have to apologize to me. It's not my company. I just do tarot readings over there. So, Sarah Yusuf is with us. Let's bring in Sarah. How you doing, Sarah? Sarah? You there?
Hold on, I gotta fix my audio.
All right.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, just about Field
Oh,
Guy.
okay, much better.
2036.
Well, happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
And happy Valentine's Day to you too, Sarah.
For the rest of us, it's Singles Awareness Day, but the real holiday is tomorrow when you have all that
Singles
discount.
Awareness Day.
When you have all that that discount chocolate.
Wendy and I talked about Valentine's Day yesterday on Robertson, and a little bit again today on she was doing a joint show with Kenny B, Morning Coffee with KB, and Wicked Women, and they were talking about it. And I got to talk a little on there too. And for me, Valentine's Day, it doesn't mean anything other than you're marking a day when you're supposed to be kind of celebrating the things you're supposed to be doing every day anyway. So I like telling my wife I love her. I love giving stuff to my wife. I love taking her out. I love giving her cards, making her things, doing stuff for her. I don't save that just for Valentine's Day. And Valentine's Day is just the day where I went out and I bought little grab bags for the kids, of nothing stuff. Little dollar trinkets and filled little bags for Happy Valentine's Day. And
I can tell you this much. If anybody out there in TV land forgot to get something for their significant other, if you have a crumble cookie anywhere near you, go get crumble cookies. They'll be happily fat. I love them.
There it is. I heard somebody on radio show today. It was the Rush Limbaugh, the two guys that took his spot on radio. Buck and Gill. Not Gill. Buck and... Oh, good grief. You know who they are.
Sounds like a redneck show.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But they're pretty good. And they were talking to a woman they were asking questions about, are there any holidays? Let me ask this of you, Sarah. You're a woman. And there are holidays that if men miss them, they get in huge trouble from their women folk. Are there any holidays that if women miss them, that guys have just as much right to give them as much shit as they give guys for missing an anniversary or Mother's Day or Valentine's Day, things like that? What do you think?
Well, I mean, the only thing that really comes to mind about, male holidays is Father's Day. So, but that's, assuming that you have kids or your father's still living. But I mean, it's like with everything else, it's about intention, because some people need a reminder, to hey, you get bogged down with the day-to-day stuff where you remember to love each other. I mean, you don't have that problem, but I mean,
and of course, Mother's Day and Father's Day and Valentine's Day, they're all made by Hallmark, or whoever.
Well, I mean, it's a celebration of relationship. It's a celebration of relationship and the love that it entails. Because that's why
there is a point, by the way, with that.
That's why we're on the planet, to love each other. So
I went to the scout meeting the other day for Ellery's scout troop, and every year, and I was reminded of this year. They took the parents aside and had a little parent meeting on things, and there's this big thing that falls on Father's Day, some kind of camping weekend, and overnight camp thing, and it was. They do this every year on Father's Day weekend, and I said, "This is on Father's Day, right?" She said, "Yep, it is." And she gave me the "Yep, it is" and I don't want to hear about it. Because I thought, what if we scheduled an overnight for the boys to go camping on Mother's Day weekend? Would that be as acceptable?
No,
it would not. So,
that's dependent on the relationship.
Well, right, but you know what? Here's the interesting thing about that. If growing up when I was in Scouts, if there was something that was on Mother's Day, and it was like, hey, can we go to the camp out on Mother's Day or whatever? My dad would be like, no, that's Mother's Day, and we need to spend time doing nice things, whatever, for Mom.
Yeah,
but is that out of reverence? Is that out of conditioning? That's one of those.
Probably a bit of both.
Discuss amongst you. You're right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's like an acknowledgement of what does your mother do for you, 360 the other 364 days of the year versus you just making her breakfast and giving her a card. I mean, it's big. Disparity of energy. It's like it's just showing appreciation for what they do.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just being appreciative rather than you say, "I hate you, Mom."
Yeah.
On this one day, I love you, Mom.
On this one day, yes.
Yes, just one day a year, I'll get you some flowers. I'll take you to breakfast. It's always got to be brunch. Take you to brunch, Mom. Why not take her to dinner?
Well, you get
Because it's on a
benefits of
Sunday and everybody's
breakfast
going
and
to work
lunch.
the next day.
You get
Brunch,
breakfast
get to
and
sleep
lunch.
in.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, we have a double standard on some of these things. Holidays, Father's Day. How many people recognize Father's Day? I mean, it's recognized. You get a card, you get a pair of socks, you know, or if you get
card
that.
to Lowe's, yeah.
And yeah,
Gift card to Lowe's.
card to Lowe's. And
all right, it'd have to be a gift card to car parts or something like that for me.
yeah, there you go. But then of course you got dads who don't do car work. I don't do auto mechanic work.
Well, yeah, and the gift card to Lowe's is just a gentle reminder that you still have stuff to fix around the house.
Yeah, that's really all it is. That would be like on Mother's Day, getting my wife a rake and a pair of gloves. Oh, they're pink gloves though. They're women's gloves.
Or a new dishwasher or
new dishwashing,
new vacuum.
Palmolive dishwashing latex gloves. Yeah.
Right.
Hey, happy Mother's Day, Mom. That would go over well. Like they say, a lead balloon. But there's that standard, though. Why is it that men aren't treated as well?
I mean, it depends on like I said, it depends on the relationship and how they feel about each other. And
yeah,
people
but in the
tend to use
broader
rather than use the words and tell somebody, it's this big, complicated system of trying to measure how much someone loves each other. Rather than just saying it, which is, it's both the easiest and the hardest thing to do.
Well, like on an individual level, yeah, the relationship dynamic is obviously going to dictate, but on a broader level, I think is where Scotty was getting at. If you look at a societal level, it's like, yeah, Father's Day, and Mother's Day. It's like it's Mother's Day. Like there is a definite emphasis placed on the other syllable.
Right.
Like it is kind of a double standardy kind of thing. But like at the same time too, I think guys we kind of do it to ourselves. Because like Scotty, and if you disagree with me, speak up, right? But like, quite honestly, the only thing that I care about with Father's Day or even my birthday or Christmas and any of the gift giving days, right, that are related to me or everyone's getting a gift, I don't really care as long as even there was just a little bit of effort, there was some sort of like, oh, you remembered. That's all that really matters.
That's it. And,
so we've kind of done that to ourselves. I don't know. Maybe we should start a movement where we get huffy and pissy when we didn't get a similar shitty tie for Father's Day, along with a hastily gotten card, and give them the cold shoulder, stomp around, I'm going out, I'll be back, slam the door, drive off. Like, let's turn the tables, let's see what happens.
I'm going drinking.
Right. We do it I think we do it to ourselves, because at the end of the day, typically speaking, men, when it comes to stuff like that, are pretty simplistic creatures.
We are.
And all we really even appreciate is the effort and the thought. Like, it doesn't need to be anything big. Like my kids are teenagers. So like, how that goes, Scotty. Once they hit teenage phase, like, communication gets wonky,
to say the least.
And they usually hate you until they reach their 20s.
Right. Or they don't return texts for days, and then 2 weeks later they answer a question that you asked, and you're like, what are you even okay? But it's like, for me, if I get a text from my kids saying Happy Father's Day, you know, because my kids live in Virginia with their mom and stepdad.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so like if I get a text message from my kids saying Happy Father's Day, and like that's it, dude, I'm over the moon. I don't care. I'm having a good day, and
I
you
love
know,
it
like
when my daughters, my older daughters, Abby and Bryn, they sent a box that arrived today, and all that was in the box was a bag of dark chocolates for Dad. It said, "Love you, Dad. Happy Valentine's Day," and then a heart-shaped box of chocolates, a mini one for Rainy, and something like that for each of the kids, and just little bits and pieces of things, of candy and cards. That's all that was in it. It was just a remembrance. And I'm like, my kids remember me, and I love that, and they're very good at that. That means a lot, even from my wife. You know, my wife gave me today. She gave me this morning. Oh, this is your Valentine's gift, and she gave me. It's a little bag. It's from the Science Museum in Minnesota, where she took a field trip with Ellery a week ago Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So for 10 days, she's been sitting on this. I don't know why she didn't give it. You know, we always have the problem of buying gifts for each other ahead of time for something.
Yeah.
And we always go, I got to give you this now. You want it now, or you want it 2 weeks from now when the day is? Give it to me now. Okay, here it is. We do that all the time. But she gives me my gift this morning, and it's a Star Trek coffee mug. One of those, when you heat it up, it's got them all standing on the transporter. When you heat it up, on the other side, it shows the planet's surface, and they all appear on the planet's surface and disappear from the transporter, from the heat of the coffee. So she gave me that. Ellery gave me a set of playing cards, regular playing cards, but they were Star Trek themed playing cards.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bunch of candy, chocolates in the bottom of the bag. No card, no nothing. But I was sitting on the sofa, and Rainey came over and didn't crawl into my lap, but like kneeled on my lap and leaned over, gave me a big kiss, and said, "I gotta go. Bye. Happy Valentine's Day." And that was pretty much it. And I gave her stuff a little later today when she got back. So
yeah, that's
all it has to be.
Right. I mean, it doesn't even have to be anything complicated or big or anything. Just a small gesture. And you know what? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's just something that's handed down generationally between men.
Yes.
Because my dad was that way. Well, I mean, he's still that way. You know, and that poor man got so many ridiculous ties from me over the course of, like, you know. And the thing is like, you know, he still has a bunch of them.
Nice.
You know, like and one there's one that he actually wears pretty regularly seasonally, you know, which is it was a Christmas tie. It used to play Jingle Bells when you'd squeeze the tip of it, you know, or one of those Christmas carols. And you know, dude still has it, and it's kind of a ridiculous tie. But like that's the thing is, you know, things like that. It seems like, you know, oh, just another whatever, but you know, because somebody made an effort. I mean, heck, I've got things that, you know, but my ex's son gave me. Like, I still hang on to them because it's the good kid doing a great gesture, and you know, it came from a place of caring and things like that. You know, and it's like what most people would think would just be like goofy stuff, like a green rubber squeaker chicken. Like he was out someplace and he saw it and he was just like, "This is funny and it's goofy and it makes me laugh and it makes me think of Jason, so I'm gonna get it."
Nice.
And so it's like, you know, hey, here, you know, this is in you know, whatever, you know, a box or bag of stuff, you know, whatever, and it's like, oh, cool, rubber chicken. Like, yeah. I don't know. It made me laugh, and that made me think of you, and I figured you'd appreciate it. And I'm like, well, I do, bud. And I set it up, you know, out there where anybody who comes in the house could see it. Like, it's still there. and I still appreciate the gesture. Like things like that carry a lot of weight.
My son does that for me. My daughters does that kind of thing for me.
Yeah.
My daughters do that kind of thing for me. There's a thing sitting right up there. Yeah.
Why does it gotta be that, we've got to take her to a nice dinner.
Right.
And there's got to be a nice whatever, and like there's expectations that have built up. Like,
right.
I have to stop myself before I go down there.
Maybe that's built out of guilt.
So I do it, but it's nice that she does. She's not expectant of that. You didn't take me out to a nice dinner last night. Oh, well, I took you out to a nice dinner last week. Well, that doesn't matter. It's not on the date.
Right, like the effort and doing the nice thing doesn't matter. Like it doesn't carry the same weight. Like I hate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, same here.
So just a difference of value.
Yes.
Yeah. Perspective.
So.
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
I wish they could bring back the old the Regency era of vinegar Valentines. Have you seen those?
No.
It's basically, I mean, you have like a Valentine's Day card, but they're like insults.
Oh, that's hilarious.
They're called vinegar Valentines, and they would have to be
nice.
I have to go look this up.
Oh yeah, you should. You definitely should. But it's Valentine's Day has always been something that, I mean, we seem to have lost the meaning of it, from long ago. Because when did it become about evolve to what we have now versus a festival to celebrate Saint Valentine? There's a Catholic saint, right? Saint Valentine, who secretly married people or something like that.
They secretly married Romans, the Roman soldiers, and the women, because they weren't allowed to have wives,
right?
Some such. Yeah.
I called up Vinegar Valentines.
Mm-hmm.
The rude, cruel, and insulting Vinegar Valentines of the Victorian era. Subtitled, "Nothing like getting a surprise hate mail from a would-be lover" on February 14th. This has got one from, it shows a picture, I think it's it's later than the 1840s, but it's got a woman in Victorian clothing, and her eyes are closed, and she's throwing a glove down. It says, "You ask to see me home, kind sir. I thank you, but decline. One bow is quite enough for me. I'm satisfied with mine. You need not sit upon the fence to see me going by. I cannot give you such a chance. There now, dear me, don't cry." Nice.
I mean, that's pretty tame compared to the other ones I've seen, though.
Oh, no,
it gets, pretty baudy and even raunchy at some point. But mostly it's like, there's like they think that they hate someone's face or something, like that.
Wow.
But
your vote from me you will not get. I don't want a preaching suffragette.
Right.
Wow.
But let me ask you guys, what is your opinion on cards itself? I mean, do you appreciate them? How long do you keep them? When you think it's okay, to throw away?
I have.
I sit on them.
I've held on to cards for an inordinately long amount of time, longer than probably should. But a lot of it too depends on who it came from and the value of it.
Right.
That I have personally assigned to it, obviously from whoever I received it from. But yeah, like this whole thing with like getting ready to move to St. Louis and stuff like that. I've done a lot of clearing out. I've gotten rid of a lot of cards. And there's a sense of guilt.
Well, I mean, you have to pull, the whole Marie Kondo thing. It's like you just
to bring you joy.
take the object. You take the object out. You say, thank you for your service, and then you move on. So I mean, if you're choosing not to keep it, so I mean, you acknowledge the energy that and the pleasure that it gave you, the emotions and stuff that it's attached to it. You honor the attachment. So,
right.
But I mean, I am, I'm not a big card person, and most of, like say if I get, them from my friends or family or whatever, and half of me feels like they're being, I get the sentiment and the gesture, but it's always like full of glitter. And you get glitter everywhere. And it's hard to, vacuum up and keep things clean. And it's like, it's passive aggressive, like, yeah, I appreciate
like
your
your friends
sentiments.
hate
Thank you for, glitter bombing the house. I can't go out and have sparkles all over your clothes and face or whatever and not notice.
Sarah, your friends hate you.
Yeah.
They're the right kinds of friends.
I know.
Keep them.
Yeah. It feels like that.
Nice.
Because they know what, how clean I am, and I keep stuff up, and still with the glitter cards, it's like the same concept of other friends giving a friend's kid a loud toy, at Christmas.
My aunt did that one year.
But even it feels like, again, we're going right again into the whole holiday season, season, busy season. We have Catholics of Lent coming up. We have Easter. We're just trying to recover from Christmas. I mean,
right.
I have Ramadan and Eid coming up. Eid is like, the Muslim Christmas. So, saying so, because with Muslims, we get like we have Ramadan, the fasting month of Ramadan, and then 2 Eids, which are 2 holidays. And then, we're done for the year. As far as, but it's all grouped together, within like a 3-month period, and it moves because, it's a lunar calendar. So,
right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, in some ways it's nice because, you get all of it done, and then, you kind of chill out and relax. You don't have to think about the holidays until like Christmas, where we have to do, stuff for the.
Do we need more holidays, or should we have less?
So,
I mean, if you look at the calendar, we have 365 days. And if you look deep enough, somebody has some sort of, official day. Like if you did a Scotty Roberts Day or official, Pancake Day or something. There's a holiday for, for everything. If you look deep enough, and I mean, not all the calendars recognize it, or, our national holiday, but I mean, there's always something to celebrate. So.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Says he has every birthday, Christmas, etc. card I've ever gotten in a box. Wow.
Yeah, single box. How old are you, field guy? I'm just trying to figure out how.
40-year-old virgin, dude. It's true. It's true.
Something wrong with it. It's just like it felt like a call out. Awkward.
Yeah.
Awkward.
I want you to all know I'm a virgin and I'm 40.
Join the club. I mean,
what? Somebody say something.
We don't even talk about the Valentine's Day massacre. We don't even celebrate that.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean,
honestly, I'm surprised that on Valentine's Day there aren't more gun stores doing deep discounts on 45 ACP, because that's what feeds a Thompson gun, and you're using the old Chicago typewriter, cut somebody down. I'm just, hey, lean into that one. I'd like to see that. I think that would be hilarious. I would go buy a box of cartridges.
Let's see where it goes.
Well, let me ask you both as gun owners, because I'll just go ahead and ask this. I saw on the news that they were counting up how many not school shootings, but shootings in public for they were saying it was like 48 plus since January. So why don't we have, if it's that much? I mean, it was like earlier today they were talking about one killed and several 30 plus people injured or whatever through that what happened in Kansas City.
Well, so let me run this by you. And I know that I'm probably going to get a lot of horrible judgment, but thought experiment.
Yeah. How come nobody's showing their face tonight, by the way, other than me?
Oh, because I'm totally
over there, Jason, or
I'm totally.
I have no idea.
Be on camera.
To blurt in while that was going on. Go ahead.
I'll show my sexiness. Why not?
So you understand what the purpose of the Second Amendment is, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's not about
it's the right to defend oneself. Yeah.
No, it's beyond that.
Beyond that.
It is much beyond that. When the Constitution was written and the Bill of Rights was created, we had just come out of a war with what we deemed to be a tyrannical government.
Right.
So every firearm that you have access to, its true intended purpose under the Second Amendment is to basically give the people the ability to liberate and defend themselves from a tyrannical government, along with defending oneself and hunting and executing.
Those are the fringe benefits of owning.
Right, they're the fringe benefits of it. So I would argue, like there's always the visceral level of things, right? It's horrible when you hear about people being killed tragically, right? It is. It's truly horrible, and it saddens me to death. But also being a military guy, I'm kind of feeling like, wow, you created a soft target by having all these rules. If you have a soft target, only the dumbest of the dumb people would actually walk into something, where they know they're going to get, gunned down in a hail of lead. But again, I probably have more of a military view on things, soft target versus hard target, etc. It's tragic, but like at the same time, the ability for the people to be able to defend themselves from a tyrannical government and from oppression, to keep the government in check effectively. Because, hey, you guys really want to do that because there's more guns than people in the United States. All right. And so you really want to go down this path with this direction that you're going, right? It's like a check valve that's just sitting there, the ability for the people to maintain freedom from tyranny far outweighs the tragic, it doesn't weigh out the emotional tragedy, but the having that ability outweighs, or maybe I shouldn't say outweigh. I'm trying to think of how to word this.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I know Yeah, I know you're getting, but trying to speak to Sarah's question, because it's so much more than just defending oneself. And once you start reeling things in and you start taking things back, you risk a greater instance of giving up more and more control and freedom. I mean, it's the ability to pursue your own destiny without being told how or what you can do within reason. Like we don't need any kind of crazy Holocaust crap going on because somebody wants to pursue megalomania, right? So there are reasonable limits to things, but there's something there that goes beyond, all
yes,
of that.
Because you're always going to have violence. You're always going to have people wanting to hurt other people. That will exist in a culture, in a society. What you cannot do is because people use some of the same tools that are used to defend the country. Doesn't mean that you should take the citizens' rights away to have those tools to defend the country.
I mean, do you want to take away? You know what? Everybody likes to drink a beer. Guess what? Cars are dangerous when people drink beer, so we're taking cars away from everybody.
Right.
And that's kind of a drastic kind of smart ass kind of way of putting it.
That's an extreme example, but I mean, like with the case of guns, I mean, should people go through a mental health check, or have to be a certain age, or
I don't think
they do already.
Ever
required. Yeah, we already do. All of that stuff is already in place.
They didn't think that way 250 years ago. They didn't think, this guy's got to have a mental health check before he owns his own firearm.
Right.
They didn't think
just stood down the British at Concord Bridge, and he's got a buttload of PTSD. We better take his musket away.
Right.
No, Thomas went back to the farm field and he plowed, and then he raised children, and he, did everything else that you do, and just dealt with it.
Yes.
A lot of things too with stuff is like there's such a huge amount of disinformation about gun ownership, about acquiring firearms, the rules and regulations behind it, the whole process. You hear all these people keep saying background checks. We need to do more background checks. The thing is background checks are already in place. And the only time that you don't see those happening, and the only place where I would see conceding some ground, I would consider it, is like with things like straw sales outside of your own family, where you are like, oh yeah, hey, I've got my pile of guns that I need to unload because I got to pay my bills. Let me just sell them out of the boot of my car to this random person going down the street, right? Okay, there's some concerns that could be had there. Maybe we should do that a little smarter. And it's too easy to walk into a gun store and be like, hey, you have an FFL. I need to do a sale to this person. Can we just run it through your FFL and take care of it, right? Like, but at the same time, I'm also kind of like, oh, I lost all of my guns in a tragic boating accident. Like, I'm like on the fence with it. But the thing is most people don't know what's involved. The big thing is that, like, there's a whole reason why they have things where there is a quote unquote gun registry of sorts, right? Every purchase that's ever made, any of the paperwork stuff, it all goes to the ATF, but it's all in paper format. It's all in file boxes. It's all stuffed in a warehouse, and it takes a lot of time to dig through everything. And it was kind of done that way by design. So that you didn't have the let's go single out people that we know have these kinds of weapons. Let's go single out this kinds of things. But like, have you ever tried to go purchase a gun, sir?
No.
Okay. So,
I used to sell them. At Academy, hunting guns, rifles, bullets, etc. Back then it was kind of so until I think it was Obama that passed that law, and then manufacturers, companies started freaking out, thinking they were going to get targeted, where they couldn't sell bullets, or they couldn't sell assault rifle guns, or these guns, or that guns.
Yeah.
But yeah, I used to have to do background checks on people.
Right.
So live when you sit there.
Most people don't. Most of the people don't understand and the people who scream the loudest about it have probably never tried to go purchase one. like, and there are certain things, if that they have a system where you can, it's streamlined now to an extent, so you can get a quicker response off of the system. Are there things that are going to get missed? Are there things that aren't going to have hit the, the system yet? There's always going to, because you're never going to have a 100% perfect system in anything. There's always going to be a flaw somewhere in anything and everything, not just gun sales. Like, it's, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not a gun owner or anything, but I mean, I don't understand the whole thing with assault rifles. I mean, which are, you know, like military grade weapons.
No, they're not.
They're really not.
Whatever.
They're not at all.
Let me break this down for you, Barney style. If you ever hear somebody say military grade, just know every last swinging Tom, Dick, and Harry and Jane veteran is laughing their ass off.
Well,
Because
what
that
I
is the-
meant by
that's the
military
biggest
grade is, I mean,
misnomer.
they're shooting, you know, 50
No,
bullets a
they're
second.
they're not. They're not. So here's the thing with that, right? Semi-automatic, one squeeze of the trigger, one round, right? So you have one actual mechanical disconnect and a hammer releasing and hitting a firing pin, you know, per trigger pull and reset. So you're not firing full auto. Full auto weapons, right, are actually, as long as they're manufactured prior to 1986 or 1986 and earlier, are completely legal to own. But they are exorbitantly expensive. So if I wanted to go buy, I don't know, an M60 Echo 3, right, you know, has a sustained rate of fire, 600 rounds a minute, right? 550 to 650 rounds, 550 to 650 rounds a minute, okay? That weapon is going to cost me, like, for a shitty example that's really worn out and was not maintained well, is going to run me like $30,000, right? Like one that I would not try to put into action in combat unless there was like an entire enemy battalion in my backyard and it was the last thing I had. Like it is completely impractical for the everyday Joe Blow off the street to purchase a machine gun. And then there's the cute $200 tax stamp. And when the $200 tax stamp came into being back with the Firearms Act in the 1930s, $200 was like $2,000 back then. So it made it exorbitantly cost prohibitive to get these things. So plus there's so few of them out there. Like, so the average person is not getting their hands on a select fire M16 or an M4A1 where, you know, you can go between safe, semi, and full auto or 3-round burst. That this stuff, it's too expensive to own and it's too rare for the average Joe person to go and just grab one. And therein lies the difference with assault rifles, right? All of your assault rifles that everybody's complaining, it's one trigger pull, one bullet, right? Each time you pull the trigger. There is no full auto. If you put in an auto sear and you're not a class 3 FFL and manufacturer, dude, you're doing hard time. And they catch you, you're doing hard time. That's a federal crime. Like, people don't understand this stuff. And the other thing that's hilarious is, like, to me, is I've got an M1 Garand mounted on the wall of my closet, right? It's a 30-06 gas operated semi-automatic battle rifle, right, with an 8-round end block clip that goes into an internal magazine within the rifle. Our grandparents assaulted Normandy with this weapon, right? But because it has a nice wood stock on it, all right, and it's not black plastic and looks scary, nobody has an issue with it. The level of ignorance within a lot of the anti-gun argument stuff going on, it could totally be cleared up in a minute by actually reading something.
Right.
and handling something. But then the other half of the time, all it is it's just it's a political thing that can be used to get people's danders up and get, you know, emotional about things. And, oh yeah, I'm going to be tough on this and that. Like, most of the gun stuff coming out of politicians, like, they know they can't enforce it. They know that they can't really do anything with it. And they just give you the lip service to their constituency. It's pretty sad, actually.
It's the same kind of things they do with guns, the same thing they're doing with the whole border bill issue going on right now.
Yeah.
They have it structured in such a way that they can use that as political fodder.
Right.
And the other side votes against it because there's no common sense to what's being put forward. There might be one facet of it that has common sense when the rest of it doesn't fit. It's like if we're voting on a border bill, how are the Republicans holding up the border bill? They're voting against the funding package that's attached to the border bill. It has nothing to do with our border, but other countries' borders.
Right.
And so this is what they do with guns as well. They put up information that is misinformation. Some of it is partially factual, but not a lot of it is factual.
Yeah.
And how can you be against
half-truths?
And then the argument becomes an emotional one.
Right.
Well, how can you vote down that guns bill? That was supposed to protect children.
Yeah.
It's because it's a wrong bill. It's a wrong-headed bill. It's not about protecting children.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that's one of the other things that bothers me with a lot of the arguments that get made. They come from a purely emotional standpoint, right?
Yes.
And then the facts and numbers and figures get twisted around. Now, okay, this is going to sound incredibly cold. And I don't mean to be cold. I don't mean to be unfeeling or uncaring, because I absolutely do care. But we've got 37 million people in this country, right? If you look at, and I'm running off of like the somewhere between 2018 and 2020 numbers here, right? So my information's a little dated, and I'm going to be rounding, so I apologize in advance for that. But so like there was something like 43,000 gun-related deaths, right, in that time frame, and it's all gun-related deaths, and that's all you hear. First of all, in the numbers game, and this is where it gets cold. The numbers game, that's a statistical rounding error.
Yeah.
Right? 37 million people, 43,000 people. That's the way they present it, is as if like it's the Spanish flu pandemic and we have people dropping left and right everywhere, and it's the bubonic plague, and like we're losing entire towns and things like that, when that's not the case. Then the other part of it, though, is also how they present that 43,000 number, right? That is the entirety of gun-related deaths. Does not break it down in any way, shape, or form between actual, like, crimes of passion, murder, okay? Like those kinds of, crime, right? It doesn't break it down by crime, by like negligent discharges or accidents, because it does happen. If you're fiddling around, you're not paying attention, and you're being lackadaisical about stuff, accident happens. It's a serious tool. You treat it with respect, but still, sometimes accidents happen. And it also doesn't put into the numbers suicides, and also crime on crime, so like gang related stuff. If you start breaking down those numbers, the actual numbers of we want to stop the murders and we want to stop the killings, right? That number drops significantly. Like the largest portion of gun deaths comes from suicides. And I am sorry, but suicide by gun is not a gun problem. It's a mental health issue. And it needs to be treated as such, and it needs to be separated out from the rest of the gun death figures. But
I worked out all the percentages on those numbers a year or two ago, and it was something. I'm just pulling this out of my ass because I don't remember the numbers, but it was something like I remember when the news was going around 3-4 years ago, and they were saying, it was during the first term of Trump's term. And they were saying in the first year, there's already been in the first month 19 mass shootings.
The definition of mass shooting is an interesting one, too.
The definition of mass shootings is a very interesting one. And so that was...
They kept actually like lowering the number at one point. They finally got it to where if it's 4, it's a mass shooting. But you hear mass shooting. When you hear the word mass shooting...
It has, yes.
What kind of mental images does that generate?
Well, mental images, you've got a whole bunch of people being gunned down by one guy.
Right. Or I'm lining up a bunch of people in front of a ditch, and shooting them all into the ditch. You know,
now it's if a guy commits suicide in a school parking lot, it's considered a school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
A school mass shooting if one person is the target.
Right.
Well, I did a percentage thing on that, and it ended up being like I said the same thing you did, Jason, at the beginning. I said, this is going to sound cold. I said, but if you look at the numbers from a pure numerical point of view, I said, you're talking about mass shooters being 0.000000421% of the American adult population. And you're talking about deaths by mass shooters being 0.00000.37%, whatever. It was some astronomically ridiculous numbers like that of the American population. And I said, now those numbers do not indicate to me that there is a pandemic of gun violence.
Right.
It sounds to me like we're certainly building up the stories for the public to hear. We're hearing more about them, but those
this isn't
do not indicate there's a mass problem.
This isn't like old Chicago, Neo Chicago, RoboCop, OCP like crime levels of.
Yeah.
No, it the way they portray it, and that's right. One of the horrible things about it is it's such a disinformation campaign.
And when you point that out, what's the argument that comes back? Well, any death is a bad death.
Right,
well,
and
yeah,
nobody's saying that. I mean, but
that's not the point that's being
let's
made.
be honest.
So, yeah,
because they misrepresent the information to elicit an emotional response.
Yep.
You know, like. You know, you ever been up late watching TV and you get the Sarah McLachlan friggin' starving pets commercial?
I flip the commercial when I want to break my television when I see that crap.
Exactly. The fact of the matter is the way they present this information and they try to talk to these people, they're just being the ASCPA, them. And Sarah McLachlan singing sad songs about sad-looking puppies who are hungry.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry. Like, that whole thing is designed to elicit an emotional response. Yes. And, like, I don't fault the people that really started pushing for this stuff. Like, when you saw the Brady Bill come out and things like that, right?
Sure.
Like, the guy who started pushing all of that had a tragedy happen, and that's horrible. That's horrible. I feel for that man. But the fact of the matter is that this instance is a statistical rounding error in the events of violence, whether it is intentional or accidental or self-inflicted. And you are punishing an entire population of people who do the right thing day in, day out, treat these things with respect, use them respectfully, use them in a legal manner. You're punishing good citizens. And that it's not their fault that whatever it was that led to this happened. It's not their fault.
Agreed. And you know what? We got to leave it at that because we got to be done.
Well, I have one more quick question because we've talked about this quite a bit, and you guys have also talked about getting misinformation. Mm-hmm. So for someone like me who would, or somebody else who may want to learn about, what is actually going on, what resources do you recommend? I mean, how would I go about doing that?
That's an excellent question. And off the top of my head, I don't have any good immediate sources to go for.
I would say,
do you have anything?
I would field guide to you. How about Sean Stroik over there in the chat room?
I don't know.
I would say probably as unpalatable as it might seem to some people, you got to go to the other end of the argument. Go to the NRA. Look at what the NRA writes about Second Amendment, what it writes about gun killing, what it writes about gun ownership and responsible gun ownership. I think what the anti-gun movement has succeeded in doing is taking a good organization like the NRA and trying to turn it into the angel of death. And they've succeeded at that because they the emotional plights that they make. The NRA is not responsible for anybody's death. The NRA is one of the largest supporters out there of responsible gun ownership.
They actually helped do some of the bills for gun control stuff, like with the background checks. Like they actually pushed for that stuff. So, you know, it's
exactly.
See,
I can try to find some resources for you too. After
well, I mean,
all,
there are good resources.
Yeah, because I mean, I trust your opinion. That's the thing. I mean, for someone who, you know, is going into this blind, they won't have the ability to discern. Oh, this is misinformation. This is not. You know,
that's the danger of politicking with this stuff. It's the danger we're seeing with the current administration trying to paint the current administration as being good for the country. They're omitting so much information and making such an emotional appeal to people that they get people on an emotional level rather than a thinking level. And many times logic has to sometimes trump emotion. You can't legislate on the basis of emotion alone. Although emotion can be the catalyst for certain legislation, it cannot be the end all and be all of creating and passing legislation. Therefore, you've got to apply logic. And you've got to apply the cold, hard facts.
And we had forgotten how to do that.
and I brought it up before. You know, it's on the end of my emails. I've had it up there for 12 years. That John Adams quote, where he says, "Facts are stubborn things," and he says, "No matter the dictates of our passions." Or the way, and I'm paraphrasing, the way we want things to be, we cannot subvert the necessity of facts being what makes law. See, you know, I've paraphrased it so much, not because I forgot the quote, because I've only said it a million times. Facts are stubborn things. Whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. And so part of the problem is those who are anti-gun, for whatever reason they are, I can't think of any reason anybody would want there to be anti-gun or be anti-gun unless they don't know the facts about guns, unless they are emotively driven, or unless they are somehow have a narrative or an agenda that is meant to undermine the reason we have guns in this country and the right to own them. So, you know, you can only come to so many conclusions about that. So, doing away with guns will not end violence.
Right.
But it will certainly end liberty and freedom.
Then we'll just turn into the UK, where it's like, all right, we're going to start banning knives. You know, like you can't buy knives over a certain length.
We used to tease John Ward with when we were doing Intrepid Radio. We were talking about guns, and we talked about, well, like the British police. And Rocky Stucci and I would give John a hard time. And we were like, the British police are like, you there, stop that crime. Now stop it. Stop it, I say, or I'll use more harsh language. You know, that, and that's kind of the way it's come down. So,
yeah, it's an interesting topic, to say the least. But if you want more info, Sarah, I'll be happy to try to dig some stuff up for you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So there we go.
That good old machete. Whatever you want to call it.
All right, guys, we got a call in the next, even machete and everything. So, I appreciate everybody who's here, and thanks for coming in, Sarah.
No problem.
Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
All right, take care. Stay.
Field guy, same to you, brother. Thanks for coming in. We didn't get much out of you, but didn't let you talk much.
I kind of let them talk. I don't want to jump on anybody's toes.
It's all right.
But JP's got to stop talking bad about my state. I'm just saying
Which
now.
state's that? Which state?
Louisiana.
I'm not. When did I talk bad about Louisiana?
You made that joke earlier with the professor.
Did you see what the professor wrote?
Yeah, I saw that, but he didn't slander my state now.
Did you? I didn't slander your state either. All I said is that, what he said was like, going to the Southern Louisiana University of Technology. Think of the school acronym.
It is what it is. Anyway, I'll jump off. Thank you for having me, Scotty. Appreciate
All right,
you.
good to talk to you. See you later, Phil guy. And Jason, good to have you, brother.
Always, always.
You have a good night, and I'll see you.
You as well. All right.
All right. All right, everybody else, thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of this show. And thanks for contributing your time. Some of you, your money, your ears, and your participation over in the chat room. Sure appreciate it. And we'll catch you on Friday. Pending disaster or anything else, we'll be back on Friday at the same time. So all of you, you have a good night, and we'll see you next time. And I just want to say, live long and prosper.